Welcome to StoryVoyage, where ordinary lives can hide extraordinary secrets. Tonight's story begins with a phone call that woke one husband in the middle of the night and ended two relationships before sunrise. At 2:17 in the morning, the telephone beside my bed started ringing. My wife, Carol, wasn't home. She had driven to Mill Creek that afternoon to spend the weekend with her sister, Linda, who was recovering from surgery. I answered, expecting bad news about Linda. Instead, a woman said, "May I speak with Carol Mercer, please?" "This is her husband," I replied. "Who's calling?" There was a short pause. "This is St. Matthew's Medical Center. A man named Robert Hale was brought in after a traffic accident. Carol is listed as his emergency contact. We couldn't reach her mobile, so we called the alternate number." I had never heard the name Robert Hale. I asked if he was a relative of Carol's. The woman hesitated again before saying, "He identified Ms. Mercer as his fiancé." For a moment, I honestly believed I had misunderstood her. "My wife's name is Carol Mercer," I said. "We've been married for 29 years. The nurse apologized and explained that she couldn't discuss Robert's condition with me. Before ending the call, she repeated the number she had dialed. It was our home number. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Carol's empty side of it. At 3:06, a message appeared on my phone. Linda finally fell asleep.
I'm exhausted.
"Love you. See you Monday." I read it at least 10 times. Then I typed, "Love you too," and put the phone down. Carol and I had never had what people would call a passionate marriage, but I thought we had a solid one. We paid off a house together, buried 3 parents, survived 2 layoffs, and spent almost 3 decades building a life that felt dependable. After Carol retired, she started visiting Linda more often. Sometimes for an afternoon, sometimes for an entire weekend. There was always a reasonable explanation. Linda's migraines, a broken water heater, a sick dog, renovations that required an extra pair of hands. I had never questioned any of it. At breakfast the following morning, I called Linda. I told her I hadn't been able to reach Carol and wanted to make sure everything was all right. There was a silence just long enough to answer my question. Then Linda said Carol was in the shower. I thanked her and hung up. Carol returned Sunday evening carrying a small overnight bag and complaining about traffic. She kissed my cheek, asked what I had eaten, and told me Linda was feeling much better. I watched her unpack clothing she claimed to have worn at her sister's house. She looked completely normal. That frightened me more than the hospital call. I gave her several chances to tell me. I asked whether anything unusual had happened. I asked if she had slept well. I even mentioned hearing ambulances during the night. She lied without hesitation. On Tuesday morning, our home telephone rang again. A man said, "I was told someone at this number claims to be Carol's husband. Is that true?" "Yes." He took a slow breath. "My name is Robert Hale. I think Carol has been lying to both of us." We met the following afternoon at a diner halfway between our homes. Robert arrived with his left arm in a sling and a bruise running along his jaw. He was 64, recently retired, and looked more embarrassed than angry. Carol had been seeing him for nearly 6 years. They met at a charity auction Linda had invited her to attend. Carol told Robert she was a widow. According to her, I had died from pancreatic cancer 8 years earlier. She had described my final months in enough detail to make the story believable. Some of those details came from my father's illness. Robert showed me photographs on his phone. Weekend trips, Christmas dinners, birthdays, and family barbecues. Carol was wearing the necklace I had given her on our 20th anniversary. Then he showed me the engagement photographs. He had proposed 11 months earlier. The ring she wore in the pictures was the same ring Carol had recently started wearing on her right hand. She told me it had belonged to her grandmother. They had already chosen a wedding venue for the following spring. Robert believed Carol was waiting to marry because she wanted time to adjust to his retirement. I later understood that she was probably waiting to find a way out of our marriage without exposing the life she had invented. I showed him photographs from my 29th anniversary with Carol, taken 5 months earlier. In one picture, she was holding my hand across a restaurant table. Robert stared at the photograph for a long time. She told me she spent that weekend alone at her husband's grave, he said. Neither of us raised our voices. Neither of us blamed the other. We were two men sitting in a diner, comparing calendars and discovering that the woman we trusted had divided one life into two perfectly organized halves. Before confronting her, I spoke with a divorce attorney. On his advice, I copied our financial records, preserved the messages Robert had sent me, and moved my future pay into an individual account while continuing to cover our shared household bills. I didn't empty our accounts. I didn't throw Carol's belongings outside. Real life is not improved by doing something reckless just because you're angry. 9 days after the hospital called, Robert invited Carol to his house. He told her he wanted to discuss their wedding plans. I was waiting in the dining room. When she saw me, she stopped so suddenly that she dropped her handbag. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Finally, Carol whispered, "Walter, I can explain." Robert looked at her and asked the only question that mattered. Which one of us was supposed to be dead after the wedding? She first tried to claim that Robert had misunderstood their relationship. He placed the engagement ring, the venue receipt, and 6 years of photographs on the table. Then she told Robert that our marriage existed only on paper and had been over for years. I showed him the messages she had sent me during our anniversary trip. She changed her story again. She said she had been lonely. She said she loved us differently. She said she had always intended to tell the truth, but there was never a good time. 6 years isn't a bad time, I told her. It's a second life. Carol began crying. Robert took the ring from the table and placed it in his pocket. I told her that I had already an attorney and wanted a divorce. She left that night and stayed with Linda, the sister who had apparently been providing alibis for years. Our divorce took 11 months. There was no dramatic courtroom victory. The house was sold, our savings were divided according to the law, and we both paid more in legal fees than either of us wanted. Real divorces rarely end with one person keeping everything and the other walking away with nothing. Robert recovered from the accident and canceled the wedding venue. We didn't become close friends, but we spoke occasionally while the divorce was happening. The last message he sent me said, "That hospital bill was painful, but the phone call may have saved us both." He was right. I'm 62 now, living in a smaller place near the river. For the first time in almost 30 years, I'm learning how quiet a home can be without feeling empty. Carol sent me a long apology after the divorce became final. I never answered it. Some lies deserve an explanation. Others are so carefully maintained that the explanation no longer matters. Sometimes I still think about that nurse calling our house at 2:17 in the morning. She believed she was contacting a frightened fiancé. Instead, she reached the husband Carol had already buried in a life that never existed. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted Carol immediately or spoken to Robert first? Share your answer in the comments. If this story kept you listening, subscribe to StoryVoyage for more gripping stories about hidden secrets, betrayal, difficult choices, and unexpected new beginnings. Thank you for joining us. And until the next story, take care of yourself and never ignore the truth when it finally calls.